In 1924, a federal agent patted down a well-dressed man at a Chicago speakeasy door and found nothing. No pistol on his hip, no knife in his boot. The man tipped his hat and walked in, carrying 3 weapons the agent never saw. That was the secret of Prohibition. When liquor became a crime, ordinary men became smugglers, and smugglers learned to hide death in plain sight. Number 14 on this list could kill a man and pass for a fountain pen. And number 3 was disguised so cleverly that museums today still mislabel it. These were the tools of rum runners, bootleggers, and the gangsters who bankrolled them, swallowed by history when the 21st Amendment ended the madness. Hit subscribe before we start, because most of these have vanished so completely that even collectors forgot they existed. Let's begin at number 25. Number 25. The loaded walking cane was the most respectable weapon a man could carry. To the eye, it was nothing but a gentleman's accessory, a polished length of hickory or malacca topped with a brass knob. But the bootlegger's cane was bored hollow and packed with lead shot or a slug of iron, turning a harmless prop into a club that could shatter a jaw in one swing. A man could lean on it at a streetcar stop, doff his hat to a policeman, and never draw a second glance. In the crowded back alleys behind the speakeasies, where settling a debt meant a quiet beating rather than a loud gunshot, the loaded cane was perfect. It made no sound, left no powder burn, and could be carried openly down Michigan Avenue. When fashions changed and men stopped carrying canes, the weapon disappeared into umbrella stands and attic trunks, mistaken for the ordinary thing it pretended to be. Number 24. Brass knuckles fit the fist of every low-level runner and collector in the bootlegging trade. Cast from brass or sometimes melted down scrap, they slipped over 4 fingers and turned a punch into something that broke bone. They cost almost nothing, $1 or $2 from a hardware catalog or a backroom foundry, and they could be dropped in a coat pocket and forgotten until needed. For the men who guarded a still or walked a delivery route through hostile territory, knuckles offered protection without the felony weight of a firearm. A judge in 1927 might let a man off with a fine for carrying them, while a pistol meant hard time. They were the weapon of the foot soldier, the warehouse muscle, the kid sent to remind a saloon keeper he owed for last week's gin. As laws tightened and concealed weapon statutes spread, the casual brass knuckle slid from the pocket into the evidence drawer, and from there into history. Number 23. The blackjack or sap was the silent partner of every doorman and enforcer in the speakeasy world. It was nothing more than a leather sleeve packed with lead and stitched tight, with a flexible spring shaft and a looped wrist strap. The flexibility was the genius of it. The weighted head whipped forward on the downswing, multiplying force, dropping a man with a single tap behind the ear without ever drawing blood. A sap could be tucked into a hip pocket, flat and unremarkable, and produced in a heartbeat. Police carried them too, which is why bootleggers favored them. A weapon used by both sides looked like equipment, not evidence. In the dim corridors of a blind pig, where a loud quarrel might bring the law down on everyone, the sap settled arguments fast and quiet. When leather saps were finally outlawed across most states, the craftsmen who stitched them closed their shops, and the skill went with them. Number 22. The slungshot was older than Prohibition by a century, a sailor's weapon dragged inland by the rum trade. It was elegantly simple, a heavy weight, often a lead ball or a smooth stone, sewn into a pouch and fixed to the end of a braided cord or leather thong. Swung in a tight arc, it struck with the force of a hammer, and the cord let a man recover it instantly for a second blow. Rum runners working the docks of the East Coast knew it from their seafaring days, where it had been used to heave a line or crack a skull in a mutiny. Coiled, it fit in a palm or a coat lining and read as nothing but a length of rope. Its very crudeness made it deadly and untraceable. By the 1930s, statutes specifically named the slungshot as illegal, and this ancient tool, once feared in every port, slipped out of memory entirely. Number 21. Sap gloves wrapped the same lethal idea around a man's own hands. To anyone watching, they were ordinary leather work gloves, the kind a dockhand or driver might wear against the cold. But sewn into the knuckles and the back of the hand were strips or beads of powdered lead, turning a bare-knuckle punch into something closer to a hammer strike. The beauty of them was deniability. A man could wear them all day, load barrels, drive a truck, shake hands, and no one suspected the weight stitched inside. When a beating was required, there was nothing to draw, nothing to drop, nothing to ditch when the police arrived. The weapon was simply on his hands. Bootlegging crews favored them for collections, where the goal was to frighten and bruise rather than kill. As proper firearms became cheaper and easier to hide, the lead-loaded glove fell out of fashion, surviving only in the wardrobes of men too old to throw a punch. Number 20. The roll of coins was the weapon a man already had in his pocket. There was nothing to buy, nothing to conceal, nothing a court could ever name as a weapon. A tight roll of silver dollars or half dollars, gripped in the fist, turned a punch into a blunt, bone-cracking blow by giving the hand a dense core to drive forward. Cab drivers used it, bartenders used it, and the small-time bootlegger, stopped on a dark street, used it because a roll of money was the most innocent thing a man could be caught holding. If the law searched him, they found cash, not a weapon. This was the improviser's trick, the fallback of men who could not risk a charge but still had to walk dangerous ground. It left no trace and required no skill, and precisely because it was never really a weapon at all, it left almost no record. The knowledge survived only as whispered street wisdom. Number 19. The boot knife rode against the ankle of nearly every serious man in the trade. It was a short, narrow blade, often double-edged, sheathed and tucked into the top of a high boot or strapped just above the ankle beneath the trouser leg. A pat-down of the waist and pockets, the standard search of the day, missed it entirely. For the rum runner sitting across a table from a man he did not trust, the boot knife was the last card, reachable in a single motion under the cover of the tabletop. Cheap to buy and easy to replace, it could be dropped down a storm drain the instant a raid began, with nothing to tie it to its owner. Knife fights in the back rooms of speakeasies were quieter than gunfights and far less likely to bring the federal agents running. As switchblades and pocket pistols grew popular, the humble boot knife faded, surviving today mostly as a curiosity in militaria collections. Number 18. The hat pin was the weapon nobody suspected because it belonged to the women of the trade. Bootlegging was never an all-male world. Wives, girlfriends, and hired couriers smuggled bottles under long coats and ferried cash between speakeasies, precisely because the law was slower to search a respectable lady. And tucked in her hatband was a steel pin 8 or 10 inches long, ostensibly to hold a wide-brimmed hat against the wind. Drawn fast, it became a stiletto that could pierce a hand, a throat, or an eye. The hat pin panic of the era was real enough that cities passed laws limiting their length, fearing the harm they could do. For a woman moving liquor through a crowd of strangers, it was protection that drew no attention and broke no obvious law. When cloche hats came into fashion and the long pin lost its purpose, this quietly dangerous accessory vanished from the dressing table forever. Number 17. The push dagger fit in a clenched fist like a part of the hand itself. Its design was unlike any ordinary knife. A short, broad blade projected from a T-shaped handle that sat across the palm, gripped between the fingers so the weapon extended from the front of a closed fist. A man could throw a punch and drive the blade at the same time, with the full power of his arm behind it. Small enough to vanish in a vest pocket or a money belt, it was a favorite of gamblers and the men who worked the floors of illegal casinos that ran alongside the liquor trade. It was a close-quarters weapon, meant for the crush of bodies in a crowded room where there was no space to swing. As concealed weapon laws spread through the states in the late 20s, the push dagger was named and banned outright in many places, and this strange, fist-bound blade slipped quietly out of American pockets. Number 16. The garrote was the rarest and most chilling weapon on this list, the tool of the professional rather than the brawler. It was little more than a length of piano wire or thin cord fixed between two short wooden handles, small enough to coil into a coat pocket and forget. In the hands of an organized crime enforcer, it was a silent instrument used in the dark to settle scores without a sound that might carry to a neighbor or a passing patrolman. Its very quietness was its purpose, in an era when a single gunshot could empty a tenement and summon the police. Because it was so simple and so disposable, almost nothing of it survives. No serial number, no maker's mark, nothing for a collector to catalog. It existed in the shadows of the bootlegging world and left the historical record almost entirely blank, remembered now only in the trial transcripts of the men unlucky enough to be caught with one. Number 15. The slapjack, or leather slapper, was the flat cousin of the blackjack and the doorman's favorite. Where the SAP was a rounded club, the slapjack was a broad, flat strip of leather with a slab of lead sewn into the striking end. The wide surface spread the blow, stunning a man and knocking him senseless without the cut and crack of a focused impact. Bouncers at speakeasies kept one tucked in a back pocket, where its flat shape lay invisible against the body. It could be drawn and swung in the tight confines of a doorway to clear out a troublemaker before he caused a scene that might draw the law. The slapjack was a tool of crowd control as much as combat, designed to subdue rather than kill. When states began outlawing leather-cased weapons by name in the 30s, the slapjack and the sap fell together, and the leather workers who made them moved on to belts and wallets. Number 14. Here's where things turn from clubs to guns. The fountain pen gun was a marvel of disguise, a single-shot firearm built into the body of an oversized writing pen. Clipped into a breast pocket alongside an ordinary pen, it looked like exactly what every businessman of the era carried. It was never a precise weapon, useful only at arm's length, but at the gambling table or in the back of a car, arm's length was all that mattered. For a man who could not risk a search turning up a pistol, the pen offered a single shocking surprise, the one shot nobody expected. These were oddities even in their own time, made in small numbers by gunsmiths and novelty manufacturers, and they were exactly the sort of thing that ended up confiscated and quietly destroyed. Because so few were made and fewer survived, the pen gun has become one of the true ghosts of the era, more legend than artifact, mislabeled and overlooked in the rare cases where one still exists. Number 13. The cigarette case pistol carried the same trick in an even more ordinary shell. Smoking was nearly universal in the 1920s, and a flat metal cigarette case was the most invisible object a man could hold. Certain gunsmiths and novelty makers built tiny single or multi-shot mechanisms into hollowed cases, firing through a concealed port while the case still held a row of real cigarettes on display. A man could offer a smoke across a table, flip the case open, and fire from a distance of a few feet, the last thing anyone expected from a polite gesture. It was a weapon of deception above all, useless in a real fight, but devastating in the moment of surprise. Crude and dangerous to their own owners, these contraptions were never mass-produced, and almost none survived the decades that followed. Today, they surface only rarely at auction, curiosities so strange that even seasoned collectors debate whether they were ever truly carried or simply made to be sold. Number 12, the belt-buckle weapon turned a man's own waist into a hiding place. In its simplest form, a small knife was concealed behind or within an ordinary belt buckle, drawn in an instant by a man whose hands had been raised in surrender. More elaborate versions hid a tiny single-shot mechanism in the buckle itself, aimed simply by turning the hips. The genius lay in the search. When a lawman or a rival told a man to put his hands up and patted his pockets, the buckle at his waist was the one place nobody looked. For the bootlegger, marched at gunpoint toward a back room, it was the hidden card that could turn the tables. These were custom pieces, built one at a time by clever gunsmiths for men who could pay, never standardized and never recorded. Their rarity then is the reason for their near-total absence now, scattered and unrecognized in the bottoms of old jewelry boxes. Number 11. The trench knuckle knife came home from the Great War and found new work in the bootlegging underworld. Tens of thousands of men had carried these brutal weapons in the trenches of France, a heavy blade fixed to a cast metal knuckle duster handle, letting a man stab and punch in the same motion. When those soldiers returned to a country sliding into the violence of Prohibition, the trench knife came with them. It was a fearsome thing, equally suited to a brawl in an alley or a close fight in a crowded room, combining the crushing power of brass knuckles with the edge of a dagger. Veterans who drifted into the liquor trade kept them as trusted companions from harder days. But the trench knife was bulky and impossible to explain away if found, and as concealed weapon laws caught up, men traded it for smaller, quieter tools. The surplus blades drifted into footlockers and pawn shops, relics of two different wars. Number 10. The vest pocket automatic was the gentleman gangster's true companion, the small pistol that fit the new century. These were tiny semi-automatic pistols, no longer than a man's palm, chambered for a small cartridge and built to vanish. They slid into a vest pocket, a coat lining, or a small holster against the ribs, leaving no bulge in a tailored suit. For the bootlegger who needed to be armed at all times, but could never look armed, this was the answer. It was not a weapon for a shootout across a street. It was a weapon for the space across a table, for the moment a deal turned sour when a man needed something that fired fast and stayed hidden until the instant he drew it. These little pistols were everywhere in their day, the unspoken standard of the well-dressed criminal. The smallest of them, swallowed by a closed fist, are the ones history has most quietly forgotten. Number 9. The garter derringer rode high on the leg, where no gentleman of the era would dare to search a woman, and no lawman expected to find a gun. The derringer itself was an old design, a tiny double-barreled pistol firing 1 or 2 shots at close range, beloved for generations precisely because it was small enough to hide anywhere. In the bootlegging world, it found a new home strapped to the inside of a thigh beneath a long skirt, carried by the women who moved cash and liquor through crowds the law was reluctant to touch. A pat-down of a respectable lady stopped at the waist, and the gun stayed hidden. Drawn in a crisis, it offered 2 desperate shots at point-blank range, enough to buy an escape. As skirts rose and fashions changed through the decade, the garter holster lost its cover, and this discreet last resort slipped from the leg into the curio cabinet. Number 8, the sleeve gun was the trick of the truly desperate and the truly clever. A small single-shot pistol, or even a derringer, was rigged to a spring mechanism strapped along the inside of the forearm, hidden by a coat sleeve. With a sharp flex of the wrist, the weapon snapped down into the waiting palm, ready to fire, all in the time it took to lower a raised hand. For a man caught at gunpoint, hands in the air, it was the impossible card, a gun that appeared from nowhere. These rigs were never mass-produced. They were the work of individual gunsmiths building for individual clients, each one slightly different, each one a closely guarded secret. Their mechanisms were temperamental and dangerous, as likely to misfire as to save a life, which is part of why so few were ever made. Today, the sleeve gun lives almost entirely in the realm of legend, an idea more famous than any surviving example. Number 7. The hollowed book turned a man's library into an armory. A thick volume, a dictionary or a family Bible, had its pages carved into a snug compartment that could cradle a small pistol, a roll of cash, or a flask of the very liquor that made a man a criminal. On a shelf, among 100 others, it was perfectly invisible, and when federal agents tore a house apart looking for a still or a stash, the books were the last thing they thought to open. For the bootlegger who needed a weapon hidden in his own home, ready to grab in a raid, the hollow book sat in plain sight on the parlor shelf. It was patient, silent, and utterly ordinary. Because the books themselves looked like nothing special, most were eventually thrown out, reshelved, or burned by descendants who never knew what their grandfather's old encyclopedia had once concealed. The few that survive are accidents of history. Number 6. The knuckle duster pistol fused 2 weapons into one fist-sized horror. Older designs married a small revolver frame to a brass knuckle grip, so the gripping hand became both a firearm and a bludgeon. A man could fire it, and when the chambers ran empty, swing it as a set of metal knuckles without ever changing his hold. For the close, chaotic violence of the bootlegging world, where a fight could collapse from gunshots to fists in seconds, the combination weapon had a brutal logic. It was the weapon of a man who expected the worst and wanted no second tool to fumble for. These pieces were rare and strange, even when new, never standard issue, and never common. The kind of thing a gunsmith built on request, or a fighter found at the back of a pawn shop. Their oddity is exactly why they vanished. Too peculiar to keep, too dangerous to display, surviving now in only a handful of museum drawers. Number 5. The sword cane was the most refined weapon a man could carry into a speakeasy, and the most invisible. Outwardly, it was a fine walking stick, the mark of a gentleman, polished wood with a handsome handle. But a twist and a pull freed a long, slender blade hidden inside the shaft, a rapier concealed in a cane. A man could walk past a policeman, a federal agent, or a rival's lookout while openly carrying a sword, and not one of them would know. In a world where carrying a visible weapon invited a search and a charge, the sword cane let a man be armed in plain sight, leaning casually against a bar with a blade at his fingertips. It was a weapon of the boss and the high-end fixer, not the street muscle, a thing of expense and craftsmanship. When the cane itself went out of fashion, the sword cane went with it, its blade rusting unseen inside a forgotten umbrella stand. Number 4. The palm pistol was perhaps the most ingeniously hidden firearm of the era, a gun designed to vanish completely inside a closed hand. Earlier designs had pioneered the idea, a small, round pistol that nestled in the palm with the barrel poking between two fingers, fired by squeezing the whole hand shut. There was no long barrel, no obvious grip, nothing that read as a gun. A man could stand with his hands at his sides, fully armed, and a person 3 feet away would see only empty hands. For the bootlegger walking into a meeting, he did not trust. It was the ultimate edge, a weapon that needed no draw because it was already hidden in the fist. It fired at the closest of ranges, useless beyond a few feet, but those few feet were where the era's violence lived. Built in small numbers and easily lost in a pocket, the palm pistol slipped out of memory so thoroughly that most people today have never heard it existed. Number 3. The Apache revolver was so bizarre that museums still mislabel it to this day exactly as promised. Born in the underworld of an earlier France and carried into the American bootlegging scene by the gangsters who collected exotic weapons, it was 3 weapons welded into one impossible package. It combined a small pepperbox revolver, a folding knuckle duster grip, and a short stabbing blade, all hinged together so the whole thing folded flat enough to drop in a coat pocket. A man could punch with the knuckle duster grip, slash with the blade, and fire the revolver, all from a single contraption. It had no proper barrel and no real accuracy, but it was never meant for distance. It was a weapon of pure, chaotic intimidation, the sort of thing a flamboyant enforcer carried to terrify as much as to harm. Because it looked like nothing else on Earth, the few that survive are constantly misidentified, cataloged as oddities by curators who never quite believe what they are holding. Number 2. The cane gun was the masterpiece of disguise, a fully functional firearm hidden inside an everyday walking stick. Unlike the sword cane, which hid a blade, the cane gun hid a barrel bored down the length of the shaft, with a trigger concealed near the handle. A man leaning on his cane on a street corner was, in fact, holding a loaded gun aimed at the ground. For the high-level bootlegger or the bodyguard shadowing a boss, it was protection that no search would ever uncover, because no one searches a cane. It fired a single shot, and it was never accurate at distance, but it offered a moment of total surprise that could end a confrontation before it began. These were expensive, custom things, the weapons of men with money and enemies. As the cane itself disappeared from American streets, the cane gun became one of the strangest and rarest survivors of the era, prized today by the few collectors who know to look inside an old man's walking stick. Number 1. The violin case was not a weapon at all, and that was its genius. It became the single most enduring image of Prohibition-era crime, the symbol of the whole violent decade. Across America, working musicians carried their instruments to clubs and dance halls in long, curved cases, a sight so common no one looked twice. The gangsters of the bootlegging wars learned to exploit it, hollowing those cases to carry a Thompson submachine gun, the fearsome weapon that defined their era, broken down or laid whole inside the velvet lining. A man could walk down a crowded street, past police and rivals alike, carrying enough firepower to clear a room, looking for all the world like a fiddle player on his way to a gig. It was concealment on a grand scale, hiding not a derringer but a machine gun in plain sight. The image burned itself into the American imagination so deeply that it outlived the era entirely. The case is gone, the weapon is regulated into near extinction, and the gangsters who carried it are dust. But the silhouette of a man with a violin case remains the ghost of Prohibition, the last and most famous of the hidden weapons that history almost forgot. From the loaded cane that opened our countdown to the violin case that closed it, these 25 weapons tell the story of an era that forced ordinary men to hide death in plain sight. When the law made a drink a crime, it built a world where a pen could kill and a fiddle case could clear a room. The 21st Amendment ended Prohibition, and the weapons it created vanished with it, scattered into attic trunks and museum drawers, mislabeled, forgotten, and lost. Which of these surprised you most? Tell me in the comments, and let me know which one you'd never heard of before today.